The most important thing for a good looking video is that the subject should be in focus. Now, doesn't matter what equipment you're using, if the subject is not in focus, it's of no use. You can't fix it in post, right? So how to nail the focus every time while shooting videos? That's what I'm going to talk in today's video. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to build an amazing online presence and run your business. I'll talk more about it in a bit. This is going to be a super fun video. You people are going to learn a lot of things. So without wasting any time, let's get started. For focusing, you have two options, auto and manual. The simple difference between auto and manual focus is, in autofocus, the camera is trying to focus on the subject, whereas in manual, you're using the focus ring to focus on the subject. The numbers you see on the top of the lens actually mean something. Let's quickly understand how focusing works. This will help you to understand the whole video in a better manner. Basically, when you use autofocus, the camera actually calculates the distance from the sensor of the camera to the subject, and the focus ring is moved to that particular distance. If you're doing it manually, you're using manual focus. Anything in the same plane will be in focus too. Talking about autofocus, there are generally two types, autofocus single and autofocus continuous. In single autofocus, the camera will focus on the subject, and then if the subject moves, the subject will be out of focus. The other one is continuous autofocus, where the camera will continuously try to focus. Certain cameras also have different tracking autofocus, which will try to track the movement of the subject and to keep it in focus. One tip for you is, if the subject is not moving, use autofocus single. Because if you're using autofocus continuous or any of the tracking methods, even if the subject did not move, the camera might think that the subject moved and it might lose focus. While using autofocus, make sure that there's good light falling on the subject and there's good separation between the subject and the background. This will help you to get better autofocus performance. Whether to use autofocus or not also depends on the camera and the lens you use. Certain cameras have really good autofocus. The one I'm using is the Nikon Z6. It has very good face tracking that comes really handy when I'm shooting my videos alone. After I shifted to the mirrorless system from DSLR, I started using autofocus more because the autofocus is that good. But when I was using DSLR, the video autofocus was not that good. And at that times, I will rely on manual focus. The reason why you should not use autofocus all the times is because it is not perfect. There are situations like, for example, if there's any particular obstacle, if there's low contrast between the subject and the background, or if there's a lot of movement, or if you're shooting in low light conditions, the autofocus might struggle. Doesn't matter how good the autofocus is, it's going to fail at some point of time. One thing is, you should not be sad if your camera doesn't have good video autofocus, because a lot of professional cinema grade cameras don't have autofocus at all. They all use manual focus. And there's a reason for it. Manual focus is a lot reliable. If the autofocus fails to acquire focus on the subject, it might try very hard, and this will result in focus hunting, and again it looks extremely unprofessional. But when you're using manual focus, since you're manually moving the focus ring, the transition is going to be a lot smoother, giving you that professional look. In this video, I want to focus more on how to use manual focus in different scenarios. But before that, it's time to give a shout out to the sponsors, and that is Squarespace. As I said before, Squarespace is an all-in-one platform that helps you to build a website, a portfolio, or an online store. As a photographer, as a content creator, I feel it is extremely necessary to have a website because it is unique to you and it showcases your work. Definitely, you want your website to look good and professional, right? And that's where the amazing templates from Squarespace comes into the picture. According to your needs, Squarespace have different templates, and you can also customize them the way you want. It's very easy. I would highly recommend Squarespace if you want to take your online presence to that next level. The link is in the description below. Click on the link and get 10% off on your first purchase. Continuing with manual focus, let's talk about different scenarios. The first scenario is where the subject and camera both are still. I will use autofocus to focus on the subject and then switch the lens to manual focus. A lot of the times, the subject is not in the frame initially, so at that time, I'll tell my subject to be in the frame first. I focus on the subject, switch to manual focus, the subject moves out of the frame and then I start recording. Whenever you focus, doesn't matter if you're using autofocus or manual focus, make sure you zoom in on the important part of the subject and check if the subject is properly in focus. For human faces, I always zoom in on the eyes and make sure the eyes are in focus. One more feature that certain cameras have is focus peaking. Whatever is in focus, the edges will be covered with a certain colored highlight and you will know what exactly is in focus. Use whatever technique you're comfortable with, but just make sure the subject is in focus before you start recording the video. The second scenario is the subject is still but the camera is moving. In that case, I'll go to the position where I think the subject should be completely in focus. Focus on the subject, switch to manual focus so that the focus is locked, and then I can go to the original position and start shooting. As I said, because of manual focus, the transition is going to be a lot smoother. If there is any obstacle, I use the same technique. And if there is no movement, you can actually start from the frame where the subject is in focus and then go out of focus and reverse it in post if you want. The next scenario is where both the subject and the camera is moving. At such times, I focus on the subject first and then I try to maintain the same distance as I am moving. Even when you're moving in a circular direction, you can use that distance as a radius and try to keep the same distance. Technically, it's not possible to keep the exact same distance every time, and that is why I recommend using slightly smaller apertures. When you use smaller apertures, you get more depth of field, and now even if the distance changes a bit, the subject will still be in focus. If the distance changes a lot, you have to manually move the focus ring as the subject moves closer or far away from you, and the most important thing to keep in mind is to understand the direction of rotation of the focus ring. It's not same for all the lenses, so make sure you're thorough with it and you practice a lot so that you don't have any problem when you're on field shooting the videos. For action shots, I always prefer using manual focus because, as I said, doesn't matter how good the autofocus is, it has its own limitations. Using manual focus in certain complex conditions is definitely not easy, and it will take a bit of practice to get used to it. To be very honest, even I have to practice a lot, but now I'm much more comfortable with manual focus than what I was when I started using it. That's it from this video, guys. Hope the video helped you, and if it did, press the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.